Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and remembering you're urging me to be short.
Just asking.
Asking. I took that as urging. This panel's been good. General, Mr. Berger, you bring a lot of expertise and a lot of expertise to what we need to talk about and experience, and we appreciate it very much. I got a couple things I would like for you to comment on. Start off with you, Mr. Berger. During your tenure with, was the NSC worried about the nightmare described in Mr. Lake's book of terrorists' access to weapons of mass destruction? In particular, were you concerned about loose nukes falling into the hands, and would you comment about it?
This was a very serious concern. In fact, in 1999, the President gave a speech to the National Academy of Sciences talking about this as the great looming danger. And he asked the Congress for $1.4 billion, most of which you appropriated, for money that provided for research, vaccines, that we had the CIPRO stockpiles because we got started then. We started to train first responders. Obviously, much more needs to be done, much more needed to be done. But this was a particular preoccupation of the President. And if you read Judy Miller's very good book called Germs, New York Times reporter, hardly a natural fan of the Clinton administration, I think she indicates that President Clinton really was very focused on this. We've got a long way to go, and we probably were focused more on the weapons of mass destruction scenario than the airport scenario. We built a airport security system in the 70s to stop hijackings. It by and large stopped hijackings. The only hijacking that took place in the 90s before 9/11, as far as I know, was a disgruntled FedEx pilot who took a FedEx plane in Memphis and flew it to San Jose. So, in fact, it appears that that airport security system had atrophied more than the people running it had known. But we were very much focused on the WMD threats.
Appreciate that. Some have criticized the administration's missile strikes against bin Laden 98 as ineffective, inadequate. And could you comment, why didn't the Clinton administration in 2000 or 2001 launch a combined military effort, something like what we've done after September 11th?
Congressman, I don't think that that was feasible before 9/11. Let's remember that in all of the Clinton administration, 67 Americans have been killed by terrorism. That's 67 far too many. 12 in Africa. But it's an order of magnitude different than what happened to us in 9/11. I don't think there was anybody up here calling for an invasion of Afghanistan. I don't think there was anybody in the press calling for an invasion of Afghanistan. I just don't think that was something we would have had diplomatic support. We would not have had basing support. And so I don't think the kind of full-scale war that we've seen since 9/11 was feasible, unfortunately, before then.
I would like for both of you to comment, if you would, on just based on your experience, both of you years around the White House. How difficult will it be for the Bush administration to maintain the focus and urgency of the war on terrorism with our allies, the American people, and with government personnel, many of whom seems to me, are pretty well stretched at this point? General, you want to go first? You've been inspiring troops for a long time.
It is. It'll be very difficult. It'll be especially difficult if there are no more terrorist acts for a while, because you can already see us slipping back into business as normal. I think part of the job of any president is to keep the people motivated, keep them stirred up, keep the issues before them, and I think so far the president has done a good job. But the difficulty of keeping us focused will increase the more time that passes without any additional attacks.
Well, understandably so. The the efforts on the war on terrorism is very, very important, no question about it. None of us disagree on that. But there are some pressures from across the country to get back on some of the domestic issues, and justly so. So will that have?
Well, I think we ought to be able to walk and chew gum.
And ride a bicycle.
And ride a bicycle, maybe. But keeping attention on terrorism is first of all, the president has declared it the #1 mission of the country. Secondly, it's not glamorous. You can't read the reports like you could in World War II of how the battle line changed over the last 24 hours and so on. There are lots of things, lots of times when you'll be absolutely quiet, and then as we have in the last few days, we've caught a few people, and there will be an upsurge. But this is not a war that the press will be glued to keep the American people up for it. And so the administration will have to serve that role.
Congressman, I can just add one thing. I think the president is right in saying rather periodically we are going to be attacked again. I think Secretary Rumsfeld's right. I support Secretary Ridge in doing the same thing. It's always a very difficult balance. How do you warn without creating anxiety? How do you tell people to be alert and go shopping? But the fact of the matter is, Congressman, we are going to be hit again. And it is something the American people do have to be reminded of continually, so that they will demand that these problems get addressed, that we learn from what happened, that they are not inert in their daily lives, but they're alert in their daily lives. So I think the president's doing the right thing by saying from time to time, we're going to be attacked again. That is true, and that's part of maintaining a concentration and focus of the American people, and we ought not, in my judgment, to be dismissing that as alarmism.
Thank you. Moving here to another point, General Scowcroft, through your long career, you've witnessed a number of strategic surprises that result in dramatic shifts in the international relations environment. The rapid fall of the Soviet bloc, the end of the Cold War in '89, Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, discoveries in '91 about his development of mass destruction weapons, and others. Is there, in your mind, do you have, give us your thoughts, is there some common characteristic to the way our government does intelligence and strategic analysis that leads us to missing dramatic paradigm shifts such as these?
That's a really tough question to answer. I don't know. I'm not aware of it. One of the real problems is that if you start to look far out and anticipate contingencies and bring those to the decision makers, they say, don't bother me with something 10 years, I got something 10 minutes away. It's very hard, or he'll say, well, that's a possibility, but I've got 10 others that are just as likely. It's very hard to do long-range planning, and I've been involved in it both in the military and the NSC, which supposedly is supposed to do that. It's incredibly hard to do it and integrate it into a government which primary job is putting out fires as a practical matter.
Congressman, let me just add one perspective on this. I think there's information and there's context. And I think often the problem is the failure to understand the context, which is why I said in my remarks how important it is to build up the analytical side as well as the collection side and to bring outside experts in. Why did we not see the Holocaust coming when you can look back now and see plenty of signs? Why did we not see the Khmer Rouge coming in Cambodia, even though there were telltale signs? Why did we not see in the 80s Saddam likely to invade his neighbor after what he had done to the Kurds? Why did we not see, why did the greatest experts on Yugoslavia not understand that the breakup of Yugoslavia would lead to rabid nationalism and wars against humanity? Those were only partly failures in information. They are generally failures of understanding and context, and I think we always have to wrap the question of information, finding that needle in the haystack, with understanding the haystack.
Do you have suggestions how we might
Yes,
take a step?
I think we live in a world, Congressman, in which expertise increasingly does not exist in the government. It's a very complicated world, and the 5 people who know Afghanistan the best or Sierra Leone the best are probably located either in academia, in think tanks, or in companies, not to devalue the people in the government. So we have to find a way, in my judgment, to integrate the expertise that exists on the outside with the information that exists on the inside. I suggested some kind of, we tried this with the National Intelligence Council once under Joe Nye. I think it was a good experiment. We ought to, in my judgment, look at some sort of a quasi-official institute where top-level academics, top-level businessmen can give 2 years, not necessarily working for the CIA, which continues to be a bit of a taint going back to academia, but can be someplace where they have access to classified information, they have access to our best people, our best people have access to them, and we're able to put the consequences of the footprint we left in Saudi Arabia after the Gulf War in a better context.
Thank you. General, I am informed that in the early 90s, when intelligence began to make clearer the threat of nuclear proliferation, while you were at the White House, you once considered creating a non-proliferation agency to focus on addressing the threat. Can you share with us your thinking behind considering this and other proposals that you might have to deal with this high priority situation?
Yes. At one time, as the Cold War turned off, if you will, the issue of the proliferation of nuclear weapons, first of their extant proliferation within the old Soviet Union and therefore into some of the successor states, and the general issue became an important one. And at one time, as we were looking at the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, which seemed no longer to serve a purpose for so large an agency over an issue which was declining in importance, we looked at the possibility of turning that into a non-proliferation agency. I happen to think it was a pretty good idea, but some of my more frugal colleagues thought it was better to eliminate an agency, and that non-proliferation was everybody's business, and that putting it in one agency would be most likely to lead the other agencies not to pay any attention to it because it wasn't their job anymore, and non-proliferation was everybody's job.
I think the last question, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Berger, that a lot of senior policymakers complain that while they're in office, the relentless focus on the inbox, the need to respond to short-term crises, which you, I think, touched on there just a moment ago, the expense of having time for long-term strategic thinking. Is it true? And what can we do about it? And what would be a role that we could play?
Well, I think it's unquestionably true, Congressman, that the urgent tends to drive out the important. I think that's probably as true for your day as it is for the day of a policymaker in the executive branch or a CEO of a big company. I don't have a magical solution except to understand that if you don't come to work every day with the idea, what are the 3 things you want to get done, and then go home if you got one of them done, feeling pretty good, and 2 of them are still left undone, and then you'll get to the inbox, I don't think you ever overcome the problem. I think you've identified a very problem, I think, that clearly exists.
So was there time to conclude that the Al-Qaeda was this high priority and so on? Did you have time to, or just was you constantly badgered with all the other things going on?
Congressman, there was no question in my mind. This is the problem I woke up at night about. We were focused on this. I wish we could have gotten bin Laden, but it was not because it was not a priority, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.